Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to welcome you all here in the room, and of course also our online audience to the session today. And we are so delighted that Sougwen Chung is here with us to discuss the amazing artwork they created here for the forum, Spectral. I want to congratulate and thank Joseph Fowler on this amazing piece Joseph curated and all the art curation here. We should give Joseph a big round of applause. And before asking Sougwen on stage, Joseph asked me to say a few things more generally about AI, art and AI, and also my connection to this topic. Actually, the first encounter with it really began when I was a student in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, when I met the scientist, mathematician, and also architect of cybernetics, Heinz von Förster, who in that meeting predicted that the future of art will be more about feedback loops, and talked about AI and actually wondered how capable AI will become and what dangers may arise from it. So in a way, that marked the beginning. And so about 12 years ago, we started at the Serpentine with a project with technology. With Ben Vickers, we began basically to build a department, which now has 5 curators, and began with a project kind of initially online, realized that these projects are more like living organisms, and then decided to also bring it into the exhibition space, and now more recently also into the park. I wanted to show you quickly 2 examples, recent examples of how we kind of collaborate with AI. One is this PathMaker pollinator project with Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg. It's called Pollinator PathMaker. There is also an online presence of it, www.pollinator.art, where you can actually, on this pollinator.art site, download instructions to build your own pollinator PathMaker. And what it is, it's a garden created by an algorithm, a planting designed to attract and support a maximum number of pollinators. So it is basically the artist and designer Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg using AI to create a large environmental artwork. In the next image, we see the most recent work. We see Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst's The Call. It's basically a project where the artist centered on the collective creation of new vocal data sets, governance frameworks, and the polyphonic AI model, a process really of data collection used for art making. And it really results in an experience of human and machine voices in which the audience becomes entwined and at times also part of the choir. And that's what you heard when you entered the space. It's part of this project with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. And of course, this idea of sound leads us right away to Sougwen and Sougwen's practice. Sougwen is an artist and researcher, really one of the great pioneers in the field of human and machine collaboration, showing us that AI can act as a collaborator. Since 2015, Sougwen has actually co-created amazing artworks with AI, trained a neural net on 20 years of their painting. And somehow, when we discussed earlier on Sougwen's practice, we spoke about Grace Lee Boggs, someone Sougwen often quotes. Grace Lee Boggs says, "These are the times to grow our souls." And I think it is very fascinating that that's exactly what Sougwen does in this collaboration with art and technology. And Sougwen says also that creativity is vital to produce the conditions for our evolution. And that, of course, means that we need artists in society. And that's why John Latham and Barbara Savini were right, that every company, every corporation, every brand, every government should have an artist in residence and an artist on the board. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Sougwen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hans.
Thank you so, so much. I wanted to ask a question about your beginnings, because we talked about sound, and your father was a singer, and you initially came, in a way, to art through music, but then through your mother, who worked as a programmer, you then came to visual arts. Can you tell us about the story of your beginnings?
Yes, absolutely. So I was really blessed and fortunate to grow up in a household where the languages of computer science and music and art were kind of one and the same. I'm also bilingual, so there's a lot of that kind of hybridity in the room. And I grew up as very much a digital native, thinking about how I express myself through the screen and what it means to represent myself in digital data. I parlayed that into very much learning about drawing in my own music style through instrumentation of violin, but also that which happened on screen. And I realized, like I think many people do, there's a little bit of a disconnect between what happens in the physical world and then what you can do in the digital world. And I really wanted to bridge that divide and make that closer together. So that's when I thought, you know, my drawing in real life, my musicianship in real life needed a space of embodiment. And I thought a robotic unit would be perfect for exploring that kind of a duet, that kind of collaboration, a way in which I could program tools to learn about drawing itself and painting itself.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you also about inspirations from the past, because in a way the future is often invented with fragments from the past, and at this very moment where there is such a strong focus on art and technology, a strong focus on art and AI, I think it's important that we remember the pioneers in this space, and you do that, which I think is so admirable very often. You mentioned, for example, Cohen's project.
Yes,
we could also talk about Lynn Hirschman-Leeson with Agent Ruby. These are artists who many decades ago worked with AI. Can you talk a little bit about pioneers who inspired your practice?
Absolutely. So I think there's so much to be inspired by in our art historical past. I think, obviously, Harold Cohen created this extension of his own painting sensibility, which I love that you introduced this conversation through this dialogue about feedback loops, because I'm bringing that extension back into my own practice. I want it to really change how I draw in sort of like real life. I'm really inspired by artists like Samia Halaby, who's currently showing at Electric Dreams, who's some of the early software pioneers, thinking about, again, how do we express our creativity visually and on screen. I think in particular, the Gutai art movement was really thinking about those extensions and how we represent our bodies and how our bodies really change in a technological kind of configuration. So, yeah, and I mean, the history of calligraphy, I come from an ancestry of calligraphers in China, so really thinking about the mark and really what it means to make expressive gestures in 2025.
And can you tell us what then happened in 2015? Because in 2015, there was an epiphany. You started to collaborate with machines.
Yeah,
you began a journey, what you call a journey of co-creation, and you meticulously scanned 20 years of drawings and created a data set.
Yeah, I was thinking about this so much. I mean, back in 2015, this wasn't really, things like data set and like neural networks and training models were not in the public vernacular. But I was still really interested in what happens when you work with these AI systems and what do I have as an artist to contribute to this really vast landscape of technology's influence on society. But I thought about the thing that I care about the most, which is my own drawing. What do I have the most of? I've been drawing since I was a kid, like many artists, and I really wanted to find a different way to engage with that. I think of it as a different temporal mode. Like, how do you look back on and reflect on the sketches you made when you were a child? How do you classify that? What kind of insights can you glean? Is it possible to collaborate with a system that's really driven from you at 6? I think it's sort of a fantasy to be able to time travel, but it was my way of time traveling through my archives. And what's really exciting about that is to this day, now we're working with 3 decades of drawing data. So it's really something that's constantly being fed into the system and constantly evolving.
And it, of course, fits very directly into the work you show here, Spectral, in Davos. You describe the work as a collaboration with the robotic system DAG, and there is a connection there to your brainwaves. Can you explain to us how that exactly works?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really interested in the future and evolution of the human hand. Obviously, we draw with movement. We think of drawing as physical movement, of traces of the hand. But I was thinking of the ways in which the body itself is kind of a generative system. We create electricity. This is a bit kind of nerdy, but like we create electricity with our minds through different states of meditation, and how that can actually be understood as a way to drive robotic drawing. So the system works in two ways. It works in that when I'm in a heightened state of creative flow, the system's only able to paint. The system is enacted and able to paint with me. And in that way, I create this reinforcing mechanism, this biological feedback loop in which I learn about how to dip into a deeper creative flow.
And it kind of goes beyond, because we began with feedback loop, and it kind of goes beyond feedback loop, because it goes into evolution, it goes into biology. And in a way, I think something is changing in art right now, which is this idea that in a way, artworks are becoming more living organisms. And some months ago, I was in conversation with Lang Xiaoji, the pioneering artist in China, who over the last 30 years has basically worked with silkworms.
Yes,
He's developed a kind of a sericulture and explained to me that these silkworms are, living organisms. And that, of course, is also important for you. So can you talk a little bit about this idea that the artwork is, in that sense, not a finite object, but it's a living organism?
Yeah. In that way, sort of designing collaborators, designing collaborative systems becomes a way of it becomes sort of the art practice itself. I was really interested in learning that the silk that silkworms produce can actually carry electricity, so they can be used into silkworm living circuitry. So in this way, just like I've designed these robotic systems, I'm exploring this sort of bioorganic, biomechanical way of thinking about mark making, way of thinking about agency, in a way that really challenges what we think of as an animal, what we think of as a machine, and what we think of as artistic and research practice.
And then, of course, in the text, because for those of you who haven't seen it, the work is literally next door. So after the session, we can all visit it. There is, of course, also a video. And in this video, you talk about different kind of inspirations from different fields. And your practice is resolutely interdisciplinary. And in a way, this idea that we can only address the big topics now of our time if we go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, that we bring fields together. You quote Edouard Glissant, a philosopher, poet, and writer. You quote Francisco Varela, the late neuroscientist. Can you talk a little bit about also how you bring all these disciplines together in your work as an artist?
That's such a great question, and one I don't really get asked that often. And I think when I read scientific texts, when I read poetic texts, I do read it as a kind of poetry. I think that there's so much about Varela's work in thinking about cognition and the mind that was radical for the time and continues to be radical. Really thinking beyond the simple definitions of what it means to be a thinking being. When I think of Edouard Glissant, I think of his book, obviously, a seminal book, Poetics of Relation. And so much of what we think of as a feedback loop is actually a really mechanistic way of describing relation. And while the engineer in me loves the idea of designing feedback loops, I think emotionally and as an artist, I think about relationality as its own substrate, as its own sort of clay to be molded. And I think we see that in our everyday lives. We integrate technology, we relate to technology in all these ways that I think sometimes we feel like we don't have that much control over. And I certainly feel like I don't have that much control over it, even though I have this background. So I wanted to create a model of shaping that relation myself, and that's been through this project drawing operations and much more to come.
And then, of course, there is the human hand, as you all see in the sculpture here, in the installation here. And we discussed this yesterday over breakfast, this whole idea that your kind of work is grounded in this question of what becomes the human hand. So I wanted to ask you to talk about that, because you say that it's about agency, but also thinking about the hand as a symbol of human agency. I'm obviously very interested in that because I started a movement a couple of years, about 10, 12 years ago, to protest against the disappearance of handwriting. So I post handwriting regularly on Instagram.
I love that, actually.
And you focus a lot on the hand, so I want to hear more about that.
There's so many different facets that I'm really excited about with the hand. I think from a kind of way of thinking about thought, there's like the napkin sketch that you articulate and show really well in Artistic Ideas Written. There's so much you can glean from that hand-mind connection that I think still has a lot of inspiration to be taken from it. I think about the robotic hand as a symbol of the Industrial Revolution and how that that in society has almost been the symbol for automation. And I really want to encourage people to think about not just the evolution of technology, but the evolution of ourselves as human subjects, thinking about how we can draw differently or meditate differently through hand movement and through these traces that drawing and artwork still have so much to teach us.
And then, of course, there is also this idea of the visible and the invisible. It's something we discussed actually here on this very same stage with Rick and Yamamoto.
I loved that conversation.
A couple of days ago, earlier this week, where Rick and Yamamoto, who won the Crystal Award this year, talked about the kind of importance, in a way, of the architect making this invisible of community in a city visible, not to make the community visible. And of course, that's an old definition also of art. I mean, Paul Klee said art makes the invisible visible.
Famous drawer.
Yes, and you say that it's also about the invisible within yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, you know, we're in an age of rampant technological invention and change. And I think about this quote by Adrian Rich, who says that the things that mark us as human don't exist or begin, exist in, or end by the calculus of technological change. And I think as an artist working today, what are the artworks that are only possible in 2025? And I think of that, of brainwaves, right? How can I have a deeper engagement with my own physical processes that allow me to center myself differently? A lot of what this Generation 4 project was incubated during the pandemic. I think I had no creative inspiration during the pandemic. I think we all lose that charge. But
you were in Switzerland.
I was in Switzerland, yeah, I was. I was in a residency, sequestered in a studio for weeks at a time. And I need relation to feel inspiration, but at that time it was really one where I was in a drought. And I thought, what are ways that I can catalyze my own creativity and my own self-knowledge and my own centering through art practice, through these sensors? I think we all want to understand a little bit more what these sensors mean and can do, and this was my way of bringing it into the thing that I cared about the most. And through these reinforcing mechanisms, we're able to explore meditation differently. I think there's so much of this technology versus tradition divide that is unnecessary. I think technology can really invigorate these older traditions like meditation and kind of movement.
Yeah, it's both and instead of either or.
Yeah, very much.
Instead of no. In French, it sounds also very good. au lieu de ou au lieu de ni. Now, also, technology and questions. I kind of think what is so interesting also is that art can ask questions. No? And a long time ago, Cedric Price said, technology is the answer, but what is the question?
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you to tell us about questions you think are relevant in relation to AI now, because that's very much at the center of your writing, because you also have a practice as a writer, and at the center of your practice as an artist.
I'm actually have been thinking about writing so much more in 2025, so I'm really encouraged by that statement. I think one of the centering questions is, for me, and I think for all of us, is, you know, where AI ends and we begin. I think this idea of collaboration can seem like kind of a fantasy and kind of a simple engagement. But I think as anyone who's really collaborated knows, there's issues of authorship and power and sustainability within every collaboration. And I think that's one of the things I'm trying to investigate in the work. How do we create really balanced collaborative models with AI that aren't simply automating the things that we care the most about away? I think that's incredibly important in thinking about. There's been a lot of very optimistic conversation about how AI will automate all of human behavior and labor and thought within the next 2 years. And I would say that while I can't speak to how things will be implemented in a wider scale, there's so much that we still have to learn from each other and from art practice, and there's so much we still have to teach AI that I think this narrative of replication is quite something that we should think more deeply about. I think about what are the sensory experiences, sensory modes of the future. I think that's a direct quote from another writer that I really love, Susan Sontag, who writes about, what does it mean to have a GPS system in our phone all the time? What does it mean to be able to send a message across the transatlantic? What does it mean to have access to satellite data? And I think these create extended sensory modes that we understand in product and applications, but in art practice, it's still unexplored. So I think that's really very inspiring for me.
When I visit studios and meet artists, very often what is interesting is that we see patterns emerge, patterns that connect.
Yeah, yeah.
And the pattern I've observed recently is that in the AI space, many artists I meet create their own company, create their own brand. It's kind of a Warholian thing, but very different.
Yeah.
I would say, Ian Chang at the moment is setting up a company. And you, of course, have for quite some time now, you have Sillyset.
I do have Sillyset,
And you're also here as an artist, but also as the founder of your own brand, of your own company.
Yes,
so I'm very curious, and I think it's for everybody here in the room and for everybody following us online, totally fascinating to hear more about Sillyset. And also how it works artistically, but also economically.
Yes, of course, of course. So I think I can touch a little bit on that. I think in artistic practice, you have several paths, right? Most of the time, the path is Sougwen Chung studio. It's very much about being at the front and center of a larger organization or creative body. I think that model is somewhat antiquated in today's landscape. I really love the idea of Sillyset, which is actually, it's the insignia for it is a legal term. It's the actual Sillyset as an icon. But what it is, it's a open system for collaboration. It's a new institutional model for thinking about how we can bring things like the arts, the sciences, and more in society into a place where we can create novel configurations. In my past 10 years of working in the way that I have, I've had a lot of collaborators, and I've had a lot of different ways of making my ideas come to life. And I understand the challenges of creating radical work in today's day and age. So we really want to take some of that knowledge and give artists the opportunity and researchers to address similar questions in unique ways. I was asked at a really inspiring dinner I went to the other day about whether I consider myself an artist or an engineer. And I kind of looked at the person who asked me, and I was like, I'm not as concerned with labels. I kind of don't consider myself, or I'm not really strongly attached to either definition. I think both artists and engineers look for different ways to ask questions, and they find the best ways to ask that question. So it's really interdisciplinary and something that we'd love to grow more in the next few years.
Thank you so much. A last question before we then open it to the floor for all your questions is actually the question about your Unrealized project. I always think it's really interesting to know more about artists' Unrealized projects. We know so much about architects' Unrealized projects because they publish them, competitions, but we know very little about artists' Unrealized projects. And the range of the Unrealized is, of course, very broad. Projects can be too big to be realized, too expensive, sometimes too small, sometimes utopic and unrealizable, artists' dreams, sometimes also forgotten project. I mean, in the locker, in a studio, on a desk, or maybe also in the laptop, a hidden file. But then also sensor project. And Doris Lessing always told me there is also the projects which are self-censored. No, these are projects we want to do, but don't dare to do. So in that whole range of the unbuilt, can you tell us about one? And it's not just to talk about unrealized projects. I always think it's important to talk about actually in order to make them happen.
Of course,
so it would be great to hear about your unrealized project, your dream.
Absolutely. So I love this question. It's so very generous because it challenges artists to sort of dream bigger and share that dream. So I really appreciate that. And I think over the past few years, I've had this vision. A lot of what really defines the process is live performance and experiments with designing collaborative systems and exploring what different categories of machine or nature we can really speculate on and embody in different ways. So I've been really thinking about creating a piece, a project in a rotunda or some sort of turbine hall that explores not the idea of a live performance, but a living performance that creates an ecosystem of relation in which the audience becomes part of it as spectator, as agent, I think we're thinking a lot about natural ecosystems and ways in which we impact the climate. And if we could create our own climate in performance, maybe we could think about how we can work together to build and renew a little bit more. So a living performance in a space where the audience becomes part of the artwork would be my dream project.
Amazing, thank you so much. We now have time for questions.
Thank you.
For Sougwen, questions, comments?
Yeah.
That was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much.
Such a full audience on a Friday morning in Davos.
Yeah.
So often artists and creators are thinking about their archives or their authorship or their IP long after a body of work is made, and it feels like you are living it in practice as a living practice. And this raises to me these questions of synthetics or cloning or what happens beyond your own gesture, and just looking to extend in terms of what the machine can do long after you have chosen to engage in your own practice or after you're able to.
Yeah, I think there's so much about the vitality of performance and translation through these models that, I think when I'm alive, it's authorship. And then when I'm maybe no longer able to engage in a certain way, it's what are the traces of artistic practice when an artist has imbued themselves in a system. I think that is hugely interesting. And I think something that's even relevant today, how do we deal with artistic data posthumously? There's a lot of models being trained on artists that have passed away. And then in that way, we think about the timeline, the legacy of an artist in a way that I don't really have any answers for, because I'm not quite at that point, knock on wood. But I do think these questions about rights and exhibition, agency and life is all sort of part of what I'm looking forward to exploring later on. But they're very, very vital questions today. What is a living estate? What does it mean for an artist to make work after they're gone? These are really philosophical questions, and they're also really pragmatic questions. And I think in that blurred area, I think we find a lot of what makes us most human. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. If there is no question, yeah, there's a question here.
Great.
It's really fascinating to see all of this, and I am super impacted by the robotic arms. So my question is more like all these AIs are always trying to make you feel personal with the machine, and that you discuss and you feel that you're not talking alone.
Yes.
With your robotic arms, for example, do you feel that you are collaborating with them, or is more like I'm working alone?
I think the human capacity for anthropomorphization is really, really fascinating. I wonder if it's unique to our species. I'm not sure, but I do feel like when thinking about the work, there's sort of a machinic animism at play. There's a history of this type of projection in religion that I think creates a really interesting dynamic. I think for me, there is an emotional aspect to artistic work that translates to collaboration. Like when I perform, there's a tenderness and a simplicity to the performance that it helps ground me in that moment of heightened awareness. So it's a little bit of a mystery to me, if I'm quite honest, but I think I like keeping it that way.
Thank you. We have time for one very last question. Okay, I'll ask it then. So there is actually one question here. When we worked with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst and curator Eva Jäger on the exhibition in London, one thing which was very central in that discussion is, of course, who owns the data, who owns the work. And so a data trust was formed by the artists, basically collectively owning these works.
I love that.
By all the choirs. So I wanted to ask you, in a way, to talk about that, about your view on ownership of data, who owns the data, and how can artists contribute to this discussion?
That's such a great question, because I think we are at a fraught time where I think all work that uses technology has become blanketed under this umbrella of AI art. And there's no one use case UI. I think there's one use case AI, I mean. There's many different ways to design systems that utilize this feedback loop technology. For me, I only use my own personal data and my own training data. I train my own models. We were the first AI model to be collected by a major institution, the VNA. And I think that's really important in this day and age, to think about authorship and to think about why you use the data that you use. Do you use the data to find an easier way to generate an image, or do you really use and generate the data to understand a little bit more about your own practice and what you uniquely can bring to the table? I think if you allow me, I think there's so much despair and existentialism around what AI art as an idea has brought into the fore. But I do think that traditional practices like drawing and painting and dance still have so much to say and so much to do that I think my way of working with these sensors and data is part of that exploration.
I want to thank you all for being here. Anamani, I want to thank you also for being with us online. I want to thank Joseph and the amazing web team. And of course, all thanks go to Sougwen, not only for this talk, but also for creating a soundtrack, especially for today. What we've been listening in the background is a soundtrack Sougwen created just for all of you for today. Big round of applause for Sougwen.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Hans. Thank you.